Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. In today's peaceful visit, we explore the remains of a 13th century Benedictine monastery on the banks of the River Wear. In a beautiful wooded setting stand the extensive remains of FINCHALE Priory. It was founded in 1196 on the site of the hermitage of St Godric, a retired sailor and merchant who settled here after a life of adventure and travel. The priory was an outpost of Durham Cathedral and functioned as a holiday retreat for the monks of Durham up until its suppression in 1538. So join us as we wander at FINCHALE Priory and explore more and understand the life and role of monasteries in the medieval period. Halfway between Sunderland's outer border and the city of Durham peacefully sits the expansive remains of a former monastery, hidden amongst crowded woodlands, now next to a fantastic camping and caravan site, and perched on the banks of the river, going by the name of FINCHALE Priory. Although spelt like FINCHALE, it's actually pronounced FINCHALE, occupying the site as early as 1196 and derived from an English Catholic saint known as Godric of FINCHALE, or St Godric, after he claimed seeing a vision of St Cuthbert. He devoted his life to Christianity, and by serving others, he was known for his kindness towards animals, living a hermit lifestyle and adopting vegetarianism by living on nuts, honey and apples. Godric made many pilgrimages too, including one to Jerusalem. Godric was an interesting character, one which drew in plenty of intrigue with how he chose to live his life. He was a sailor, a merchant, a pilgrim, a hermit, and a writer of religious verse. He was born in Walpole in Norfolk in 1070, and he became a ship's captain and part owner of 2 vessels, making several pilgrimages to Rome, Jerusalem, and Santiago. Whilst out in the waters, Godric also visited Farne Island, which is off the coast to Lindisfarne, where St Cuthbert had sought seclusion. This then inspired Godric to become a hermit. Eventually he found peace at FINCHALE around 1112. It was here that Godric wanted to pay for his past sins by living his life with austerity. His diet initially consisted of roots and berries, but then he later cultivated barley and vegetables, but would only ever eat these if they were dry and mouldy. He was dedicated to the Virgin Mary, and he had cleared the forests to build himself a wooden oratory, in which he had a barrel in its floor and filled it with freezing water to then immerse himself into it. He later built a stone chapel and dedicated that to St John the Baptist, whose life in the desert provided Godric inspiration for medieval hermits. He nearly lost his life, firstly to a deadly flood, and secondly in the hands of the Scottish soldiers who were searching for treasure. But other visitors had much more peaceful intentions when seeing Godric, as it was thought that he had the ability to heal the sick and give power of prophecy. He was best remembered for his kindness towards animals. It is said that his handmade hut was a place for shelter for animals seeking refuge from hunters and the weather. Historians have written how Godric was small in stature, but he had exceptional strength and was full of energy all of the time. It was not until he had completed 60 years of retirement from the world did he pass away. It was on the 21st of May in 1170, at the ripe age of 105 years old, and after a very long illness. His tomb became a shrine where many miracles were performed. Like many medieval saints, Godric was never formally canonised. Instead, his devoutness was shown by those who knew him, and his stories continued to be told by the monks of Durham, and now through us and other lovers of history to tell his story. After Godric's death, the Durham community sent 2 monks, Reginald and Henry, to occupy his hermitage. In effect, FINCHALE became a small minor monastery of Durham. In 1196 it became a priory in its own right, when the monks of Durham persuaded Henry de Puisset, the son of Bishop Hugh de Puisset of Durham, to endow it with possessions he had previously granted on another monastery. The priory prospered as a place of pilgrimage. It initially seemed to have had been 10 monks, but a grant was made in 1278, specified that there should be 5 more, to help entertain the pilgrims and the poor people who were flocking to Godric's shrine. Godric's old church seems to have remained standing, while a new church was built around it. His older chapel, dedicated to St Mary, was rebuilt on its old foundations and linked to the north arm of the new church. Building works took several decades and may have not even begun up until the 1230s. Finchale's development as a holiday retreat for the local Durham monks came about when the Durham community shrank during the first half of the 14th century. Loss of revenue as a result of conflict between the English and the Scots meant that an alternative use had to be found for the priory, and then they hit the idea of making it a place of rest. There seemed to have only been 5 or so monks living at Finchale, and its buildings were in very poor state. The monks' response was twofold. First, in the 1360s, they reduced the size of both their church by removing the aisles and the other buildings. But at the same time, the prior's house was renovated, suggesting that it had become the focus of life for the small community. Secondly, they concentrated on Finchale's role, which it may have been serving for some time, as a retreat for the monks of Durham. Then Finchale continued to serve this function up until the suppression. Rules were drawn up in 1408 that spell out how the holiday home should operate. The arrangement was that 4 monks would stay at Finchale for 3 weeks at a time, under the supervision of the prior and 4 resident monks. And on alternate days, 2 of the 4 holidaying monks were all to attend the all church services, while the other 2, though attending Mass and Vespers, were free to walk religiously and honestly in the fields. How strictly the monks followed the rules is uncertain, especially as they were given free rein. All 4 visitors were to sleep in the dormitory with the 4 resident monks, but they were allowed a special chamber with a fire and other comforts, to which they might resort to when they were pleased, and the prior assigned a servant to wait on them. Each of the visitors was to celebrate High Mass at least once a week, and on a Sunday they were all to be present in the chapter and at the Lady Mass. There was a room in the priory known as the player chamber, which is supposed to have been appropriated to dramatic representations, such as mysteries or miracle plays, and to amusements for the monks, like listening to the minstrels and the gleemen who visited the house. Essentially, it was a medieval version of Butlins. After the suppression in 1538, little is known about what actually happened to the buildings, but some parts remained in some sort of use, but mostly they all fell to ruin, and there was stone robbed from the priory buildings that can be seen in the nearby farm buildings. Of course, there is questions on some selective landscaping through demolition in the 18th century to improve and inspire the site's appearance, at the time when the ruins became the latest thing and romantic ruins became the perfect setting and backdrops for novels and artists. Some excavations were done in the 1920s from the Office of Works, who were the predecessors of the English Heritage, who had taken the priory into state guardianship. There were traces of Godric's Church of St John inside the east end of the 13th century church, where they uncovered a stone coffin where St Godric is said to have laid to rest. The coffin was around 5 foot 2 inches long, inside with a tapered end, reminding us of Godric's frail and small stature after his long illness. It was made of stone with a lid of polished marble, appeared to fit the hermit's tiny frame, but it was completely empty when they unearthed it. Questions are still asked about this, but it was also around the time when grave robbers came and took as they pleased. But other theories are that his body and soul were spirited away in another miracle. About 25 years after St Godric's death, Finchale was made into a priory, dependent on Durham Cathedral. Building works were normally done in stages, as is the case with most historic buildings. Some of the first buildings were east of the later church. They provided accommodation for the first monks that were sent to Finchale. Although very ruinous, the remains are still here, and all of the nooks are able to be explored. They consist of a domestic hall, a solar, kitchens, warming rooms, priors' lodgings, and plenty of undercrofts and cellars used for storage. It was only later in the 13th century that the rest of the priory was built. On the north side is the priory farmhouse, whose roof is built entirely of timbers felled in 1369. The farmhouse was originally connected to the old priory mill, and of course the mill stream can still be seen. Fragments of monastic stonework can be glimpsed on in the farm buildings, including trefoil windows and carved pier capitals. The priory came under attack in 1942 by the German Air Force, and 2 bombs were dropped on the site. It is thought that the Luftwaffe had set out to bomb nearby Durham Cathedral as part of the raids in the north-east of England. However, as they approached the cathedral on the 1st of May in 1942, a dense mist came over the city, and the bombs mistakenly hit Finchale Priory, saving the cathedral. Some people believe that this is the spirit of St Cuthbert, who was behind the camouflaging of the cathedral. I think from our visit what's most interesting and most notable is the sheer size of the church itself. It's incredible to imagine in its heyday being used by the monks in their day-to-day. The massive stone arches and all of the interesting details surround you, and it's where you need to take some time to look around. From records, we know that the monks on their holidays spent their time here in the prior's house. This is where they took their meals, although they would have slept in the dormitory. The vaulted cellar below the refectory is a must-see. The stonework is so delicate and beautiful. And when we were looking around, we could see that in the southern part of this room, it had 19th century dated graffiti, which was really interesting to stumble upon. My absolute favourite room of the whole priory was the refectory. Just the arched entrance and the steps were enough for me, but then inside is just so grand. It really reminded me of the castle's Great Hall. It had all of the mod cons from what you expect a refectory and a hall to be. The monks of the Black Order would have sat on tables in silence, eating their meals, but all still able to communicate with hand signals, with one monk reading aloud their scriptures, which was a religious book from the rule of St. Benedict. The priory itself might be described as mysterious, isolated and a tranquil place to visit that has an air of discovery about it, but it really is a fantastic place to come and explore some of the North East's hidden ruins. The location is utterly wonderful, and you can see why Finchale was considered a place for the monks to rest and recharge their batteries. When visiting here, please note that the priory is in the care of the English Heritage, and it's free to enter, but it is on private land right next to a camping and caravanning spot, with a gated entrance system. It was £3 at the time of our visit, which when you consider entering the priory, being able to visit the local shop and toilets, and having a leisurely walk and picnic along the super scenic river, it's worth it to help with the upkeep of these stunning areas. For those wanting to pinch the pennies though, there is a footbridge over the river on the far bank where you can indulge in some walking trails and still oversee the remains in the distance. All you need to do is find Cocken Road, where you'll find free parking available in a lay-by, and then follow down a charming trail to the ruins. We really hope you've enjoyed our visit today, and it's inspired you to take a trip either here or out and about to enjoy our beautiful country. If you have, please hit that like button, consider joining us over on the channel or on our Patreon. All links are in the description, and please consider subscribing to the channel to encourage us to carry on making these videos for you. We want to say a massive thank you to our Patreons and to our channel members for supporting us. So we'll see you on the next one. Till next time.